If one day you were offered financial support to buy a home in a community ready to welcome you like family, would you dare to say, "Today I'm leaving and starting over"? This video isn't about living cheaply, and it's not a call to abandon your homeland. It's about something deeper: the right to rebuild your life, the right to slow down to be loved, and to exist in a way that may have become a luxury back home. In some parts of the world, mornings don't begin with traffic noise and pressure. They begin with calm seas, with green hills stretching to the horizon, with a pace of life slow enough to remind you that you are still living, not just trying to survive. In these communities, you don't remain a stranger for long. Neighbors know your name. They bring freshly baked bread to your door, invite you to local celebrations, and treat your presence as a natural part of the neighborhood, not something to be questioned. These are not painted fantasies or empty promises. These places are real. And what few people realize is that some of them are actively searching for new people, those willing to live alongside them, sustain their communities, and help carry their stories forward. So the question isn't whether you're brave enough to leave. It's this: among the 5 countries we're about to explore, which one could make you willing to let go of everything? Familiar, pack your bags and begin an entirely new chapter of your life. Stay with us until the end of this video. You may find the answer you've felt for a long time but never quite dared to name. Country 5: Portugal inland/small towns. For many Americans, the idea of leaving doesn't begin with a thirst for adventure. It begins with exhaustion. Exhaustion from rising living costs. Exhaustion from a life where everything is measured by speed, productivity, and the bills due at the end of the month. And exhaustion from the feeling that no matter how hard you work, life always seems to be not enough. Portugal especially, its small inland towns, rarely appears in the big dreams people grow up with in the United States. Not because it lacks beauty, but because it doesn't promise a breakthrough. And that is precisely why some people stop here. Because this is not a place that asks you to become better, richer, or faster. It is a place that allows you to slow down without feeling guilty. Mornings in these towns feel very different from mornings in America. There's no line of cars inching along a freeway, no pressure to leave the house early just to beat traffic. The day begins when windows open and the streets are still quiet. You step outside and walk to a nearby cafe. No one asks what you do for a living. No one questions why you're here. You are simply a person living your life, and that is enough. For many Americans who move here, the first thing they gain isn't money, but a subtle sense of safety. Safety in the simplicity of daily life. Safety in knowing that basic needs, healthcare, housing, everyday expenses aren't constantly threatening you. In Portugal, the public healthcare system is stable and accessible, a stark contrast to what many Americans are used to. You don't have to weigh whether a doctor's visit is worth the bill. And when that fear disappears, your mind begins to feel lighter. More importantly, you are left alone. No one asks what you're doing with your life. No one expects you to stay busy to justify your existence. In a culture like the United States, where a person's worth is often tied to productivity, this kind of quiet can feel uncomfortable at first. But over time, many people realize something important. It's in that silence that they finally hear themselves again. The cost of living in Portugal's inland towns isn't shockingly cheap, but it is manageable, comfortable enough that you don't have to live defensively. Rent is reasonable. Daily expenses are simple. You're no longer constantly calculating whether you've crossed an invisible financial line this month. For Americans who've spent years living paycheck to paycheck, this stability can feel deeply liberating. I once met an American man in his 50s living in a small town several hours from Lisbon. He had worked in tech, earned a decent income, and lived under constant pressure. He told me the reason he stayed in Portugal wasn't the weather or the scenery. It was the fact that for the first time in years, he no longer felt life pushing him from behind. He woke up without dreading the day ahead. He went to sleep without carrying tomorrow's anxiety with him. Of course, this life isn't for everyone. Income levels are much lower than in the US. Bureaucracy moves slowly and can be frustrating. Entertainment options are limited and quiet. For people who need constant stimulation or the feeling of being at the center of everything, Portugal can feel like a step back. But for some Americans, especially those who are past the phase of needing to prove themselves, the trade-offs are clear. They aren't searching for more. They're searching for enough. Enough time. Enough calm. Enough space to live without turning life into an endless race. So the real question isn't whether Portugal is better than the United States. It's this: are you willing to live slower in order to live lighter? Country 4, Mexico Yucatán / colonial towns. Morning arrives early in the Yucatán. Sunlight spills across pastel streets, doors open wide, and life moves outward instead of inward. People don't retreat into their homes here. They step outside. Sidewalks become living rooms. Courtyards fill with conversation. By the time the heat settles in, the town is already awake, neighbors greeting one another, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, families sharing the first moments of the day together. In these colonial towns of Mexico, life is lived in public, not in a performative way, but in a human one. You notice it immediately. Meals stretch longer. Evenings happen on front steps instead of behind closed doors. Children move freely between houses. People know who belongs on the street, not because they're watching, but because they care. For many who arrive from faster, more isolated places, this openness feels unfamiliar at first. Then it starts to feel like something that had been missing all along. What people gain here isn't luxury, it's welcome. The kind that doesn't need explanation. You're invited to birthdays, neighborhood dinners, casual gatherings that don't require planning weeks in advance. Social life isn't something you schedule into an already full calendar. It's something that happens naturally, almost by accident. And food plays a central role in all of it. Simple meals, fresh ingredients, street food that costs a few dollars but brings people together night after night. Eating becomes social again, not rushed, not solitary. The cost of daily life in the Yucatán makes this openness easier to sustain. Rent stays within reach. Groceries don't demand constant calculation. Eating out is part of normal life, not a special occasion. You don't feel pressured to earn more just to maintain a basic standard of living. And when money loosens its grip, people loosen theirs too. Time stretches. Evenings last longer. Conversations don't end abruptly because someone has to rush back to something else. I once met a foreigner who moved here expecting sunshine and history, but stayed because of people. He hadn't planned on integrating deeply, but over time he found himself pulled into the rhythm of a local family Sunday meals, shared errands, quiet afternoons under shaded patios. He wasn't trying to fit in. He simply showed up often enough that one day he realized he already had. No formal welcome, no ceremony, just inclusion. Of course, this kind of life asks for tolerance. The heat can be relentless. Noise travels easily through open windows and narrow streets. Traffic follows its own logic, one that doesn't always align with schedules or expectations. Privacy exists, but it's different here. Life is shared more openly, whether you're ready for it or not. Still, for many, that closeness is exactly the point. The Yucatán doesn't offer quiet in the traditional sense. What it offers instead is connection, daily, visible, unavoidable. And that leads to a simple question worth sitting with. Do you need silence? Or do you need people? Country 3, Romania, Transylvania. There are places that don't welcome you with immediate warmth. No polite smiles. No friendly invitations from the first day. Transylvania is one of those places, and that is exactly why it attracts a very different kind of person. Winter mornings in the old villages of Transylvania arrive in silence. Snow rests lightly on aging wooden roofs. The village roads are so narrow that even the sound of footsteps feels amplified. There is little movement, no unnecessary noise. Everything seems to slow down, making room for stillness. Here you're not awakened by the outside world. You wake on your own, and the day begins only when you're ready to step into it. Transylvania isn't for those who need constant stimulation. It's for people who've lived surrounded by noise and now want to understand what life feels like when it isn't constantly interrupted. What many people gain here isn't modern convenience, but space, both physical and mental. Homes are so affordable that owning one no longer feels like a distant dream. More importantly, the villages are small enough that your presence is noticed. In these communities, you don't blend into a crowd. You're known by name, not out of curiosity, but because you're part of something small and interconnected. The baker remembers which day you usually come. Neighbors notice when your lights are on at night. The sense of belonging is quiet, never performative, but it deepens over time. For those accustomed to cities where no one knows who you are, this feeling can be both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. The cost of living in Transylvania mirrors its pace of life. Buying or renting a home is remarkably inexpensive. Daily life doesn't demand much money to sustain, but in return, it asks for presence. You can't live on autopilot here. Everything moves slowly, and you're required to move with it. I once met a foreigner who chose to stay in a small village instead of moving to a larger city. He told me the city offered more opportunities, but the village gave him something clearer. He knew when winter was coming, when to prepare firewood, when the entire village would come together for a shared task. He didn't come for opportunity. He stayed for the clarity that village life provided. Of course, Transylvania doesn't hide its trade-offs. Winters are long and cold. Days are short with limited daylight. The language is difficult, and the initial sense of distance is unavoidable. This isn't a place for those who fear silence, but for some that silence offers exactly what they've been searching for. So the question isn't whether this place has enough conveniences. It's this: can you endure physical solitude? In exchange for mental peace, Country 2, Malaysia, Penang. Mornings in Penang begin at the market. Not the rushed kind, but a steady flow of daily life. The smell of freshly brewed coffee blends with spices in the air. Conversations overlap in multiple languages, and small stalls open in a rhythm everyone seems to understand. Here, diversity isn't a slogan. It's present in every meal, every street, every brief exchange throughout the day. Penang is neither loud nor asleep. Its pace is balanced and consistent, as if each day already knows where it's going. For people coming from societies that move too fast, this steadiness can initially feel dull. But over time, it becomes something rare, a sense of calm that doesn't require constant adjustment just to keep up. What many people gain here is balance. Healthcare is reliable, accessible, and doesn't turn every medical need into a stressful calculation. The cost of living is low relative to the quality of life, allowing you to maintain stability without constant financial anxiety. And because Penang sits at the crossroads of Malay, Chinese, and Indian cultures, integration doesn't require you to reinvent yourself. You simply respect the shared rhythm of life, and that's enough. For some Americans who choose Penang as a long-term home, the appeal isn't novelty, it's sustainability. This isn't a place you pass through, it's a place you settle into. Everything is built around everyday living, housing, transportation, healthcare, even the smallest routines, like eating and socializing. Life here doesn't push you toward extremes. It allows you to remain in a steady, livable middle ground. I once met an expat who had lived in Penang for over a decade. He didn't come to explore and move on. He arrived, stayed, and built a very ordinary life. Familiar food stalls, familiar walking routes, a familiar daily rhythm. He told me that this repetition was precisely what made the place valuable, because it gave him a sense of stability he had never known before. For many Americans accustomed to constant change just to stay afloat, that stability carries a very different weight. Of course, Penang comes with its trade-offs. The humid climate can be difficult to adapt to. Laws are enforced strictly, and personal freedom doesn't look the same as it does in many Western countries. This isn't a place where you can do whatever you want without considering the surrounding context. But those limits also create order, a life with structure, a society that functions predictably over time. And that leads to a simple but important question, especially for anyone thinking long-term. Do you need absolute freedom or long-term stability? Country 1. Nicaragua. Mornings in Nicaragua aren't marked by schedules. They begin when the lake brightens, when mist slowly lifts from still water, and when small villages wake up in step with nature. Here, the lake isn't just scenery, it's the center of daily life. Everything moves around it, when the market opens where people gather, and how the day unfolds. The small villages near the lake or along the edge of nature offer very few distractions. There are no large shopping centers, no familiar chain stores. Instead, there is space. And within that space, many people begin to feel their lives more clearly. You step outside not to go somewhere, but simply to be close to the water, to the trees, to other people. What many gain from living in Nicaragua is a very clear sense of enough. The cost of living is so low that money no longer dominates your thoughts. Housing is simple but sufficient. Local food is inexpensive and easy to find. Life doesn't require you to earn more just to cover basic needs. As financial pressure fades, mental weight often fades with it. Closeness to nature here isn't a luxury experience, it's everyday life. You see the lake daily. You hear the rain more distinctly. You notice the change of seasons through light and air, not calendars. And because communities are small, relationships are direct. People know where you live. They notice when you're gone. They invite you to simple meals, not out of politeness, but because that's how life works here. I once met a small family who chose Nicaragua after years of moving from place to place. They weren't searching for rapid growth or big opportunities. They wanted a place where a simple life was sustainable, where children could grow up close to nature, and where each day wasn't shaped by constant pressure to move forward. For them, staying wasn't a strategic decision. It was a practical one. Of course, Nicaragua comes with clear trade-offs. The political environment can make people hesitant. Professional opportunities are limited. This isn't a place for those looking to expand careers or chase continuous growth. Life moves slowly here, and at times it can feel almost still. But for some, that stillness holds meaning. It creates room to live without urgency, to let days pass without needing to prove anything. And when the pursuit of more finally quiets down, a very simple question remains. Do you need opportunity, or do you need enough? There is no place that is best for everyone, and there is no country that can solve every problem in your life. Each place is simply a choice, a setting, a different rhythm of living, where you place yourself and discover how it feels. There are only places that fit the stage of life you're moving through, fit the pace you're able to live with, and fit the person you're slowly becoming. And as you change, what you need from a place will change with you. Some places offer quiet. Some offer community. Some offer stability. and some offer something very simple enough to keep living without having to run. Nothing more. Nothing less. What matters isn't where you go, but whether you understand what you're actually looking for. Because without that clarity, no matter where you are, you may still carry the same old exhaustion with you. So if you had to choose one of the places we've just explored, where would you stop? There's no perfect answer. Just share your choice and the real reason behind it in the comments. And if you saw yourself somewhere in this story, if these places made you start thinking differently about the life you're living, tap the like button to support the channel and subscribe to continue these journeys together. There are still many places out there waiting for people who fit their rhythm, and maybe one of them is waiting for you.